The Goner Records Podcast. Goner Records Podcast. The Goner Records Podcast. The Goner Records Podcast. Welcome to another edition of the Goner Records Podcast. This is from a couple months back. I got a chance to talk to Ryan Leach in Austin, Texas. Ryan's a prolific writer and was involved in writing a lot for Terminal Boredom and his own Bored Out fanzine, a bunch of interviews. Also put out the book, Ross Johnson's book that we just put out, Goner and Spacecase as well. Spacecase is his label that's put out a whole bunch of stuff, including Dutch Masters, band that I was in, with Scott Rogers, Punk Rock Pat, Talbot Adams. A bunch of Memphis stuff, a bunch of New Zealand stuff, some LA stuff, Wednesday Week, and Urinals projects and things like that. Anyway, I think I was really down on Memphis when I was doing this interview, rightfully so. But you got to keep your head up, right? Anyway, here is a interesting, I hope, talk between me, Eric, and Ryan Leach, Spacecase Records. I'm talking today with Ryan Leach. Mm-hmm. Ryan is head of Spacecase Recordings. Was it Spacecase Books as well?
I guess they fall under the same umbrella. Yeah.
Bored Out was under Spacecase, and
yeah. I called it Bored Out because when I bought my 51 Ford, it came with a Chevy small block, and the guy in the instructions was like, "This was bored out 30 over." Like it added some huge amount of horsepower to the motor, which it didn't. He just cleaned up the cylinder. So I thought I don't know. It just stuck with me.
Yeah, it sounds good. Yeah, Bored Out is a great name for the thing. Ryan's been writing and putting out records for forever. So with special ties to Memphis and LA and New Zealand, and kind of underground. I kind of feel like you're tied into some kind of classic underground type thing rather than a specific punk or whatever. It just feels like stuff that's beneath the, I don't know. It just kind of fits to me like underground music. Is that kind of what you think about it, or do you just know what you like?
Oh, I wasn't trying to build. A niche for myself. If I like something, I just put it out. And a lot of these things reflected where I was living at. So you mentioned New Zealand. I lived in New Zealand with my wife Moore, who I did the record label with and still do it with. We lived there from 2010 to 2011. And so the label actually started there because our visas were running out. So we had to go back. And Robert Scott of The Clean and the Bats had some really great 1979 to 1982 unreleased material. It was called Electric Blood. And I told him, I got to know him and I interviewed him out there, and I said, "Hey, I have to go back, but one of the things I want to do is put this out. I want to make this count, basically." And so he said, "Sure." So we did a 7-inch EP. I got back with maybe $500 in my bank account. So then as soon as I got enough money to put it out, which was like 6 months of working at the cabinet shop, I put it out. But to get back to your point, yeah, I never, I'm not trying to sound like a revolutionary, but I never tried to play the game of doing public relations or any of that type of stuff. If I like something, I just put it out. You know, I mean, you look at the great labels, these kind of like Desperate Bicycles or Sue Petticoat or any of those types of things. That's what I was interested in. I was interested in Thomas Lear and Robert Rennell, totally DIY stuff. I didn't care. And at the time, Goner Board, I'm not trying to butter you up, but Goner Board, I could go post something on there, sell 10, 15 copies of a 7-inch. Terminal Boredom, I can move 25 copies of anything on there. So there was that, unfortunately, is really going by the wayside. But there was a time there, you had Volcanic Tongue in Scotland. They'd buy anything. And it was just a wonderful, the infrastructure was dying, but it still had a faint pulse at that time.
Yeah, it really blows me away to think that, you know, in the 80s, this Dutch East India Homestead Records, the Gibson Brothers and stuff, was totally unknown bands that they were pressing 5,000 copies of, you know, and the scale of that to us is just like 5,000 copies. You're I don't know, the Pixies or something.
So yeah, I was born in 82, and I'm just telling you that because I had faint memories of what was called the grunge movement. And by the time I was really listening and taking stock of music, it was in the late 90s. But I had missed sort of that whole thing. And in my mid 30s, I watched the documentary Hype. And there's this moment in the film where some guy who's a hype man to Bruce Pavitt at Sub Pop Records, he says something like, don't quote me on it, I think it's just maybe I'm just getting the theme of it, but he says something like, Bruce Pavitt didn't want to release 1,000 singles like these other labels and sell them out in 3 months and feel like he had accomplished something. He wanted more. And I just went, what? 1,000 copies? 7-inch, and you sold them in 3 months, and that guy was failing?
Right.
And those were, to quote Charlotte Pressler, those were different times. So yeah, exactly what you're saying. I mean, the Gibson brothers were in Spin Magazine, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, it was a completely different environment for that type of music.
Yeah, it was strange, and yeah, everything is just sort of there's more of everything online and less kind of focused to anything. And
that
people are
the journalism in general. That goes for journalism in general, is that once you couldn't put barbed wire around an idea, to quote Robert McChesney, whether that's records or whether that's journalism with a legacy media, it just got shot out there. And then it was less of a community in a lot of ways because you didn't have a central meeting point anymore. It was just these kind of echo chambers, and they were all niche. And but I'd also say that, as you know, I kind of missed a lot of stuff because a lot of that stuff was going on when I was a child. But the guy that really was doing a lot of that stuff too was Tom Lax at Silk Breeze.
Yeah.
So when I lived in New Zealand, I was really just hunting down a lot of the stuff that didn't make it on Expressway or what was on Flying Nun, of course. And then you come back, and the guy that really seemed to break that open, to give credit to, it was Lax over at Silk Breeze in the 90s.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at the stuff that he comes up with, and he's tuned into, that somehow this stuff sounds like an essential release when he just seems to have picked it up out of the air. I mean, I don't know how he finds this stuff, but he's just got a really highly tuned in antenna, you know, listening for this stuff. And Silk Breeze is just, always, you know, always been an inspiration from a magazine and the records. And then finally getting to meet him with Gonerfest going on for so long. Eventually I got to meet Byron Coley and Tom Lax, these guys that are just kind of like up in the clouds to me, you know, and Seymour Glass eventually. And I was like, you know, these are just normal people that like good music and are just trying to push it, you know, get it out there so other people can enjoy it.
Yeah, the thing about Byron Coley was he was really intelligent. So all the articles and stuff and forced exposure from that period when he was really involved were really good. I was, again, before my time, but I would get old issues and I couldn't believe it. You know, stuff like Chain Gang and stuff. I mean, I don't know. When I caught the tail end of that. So I graduated college in 2004. I was 22 and I was writing. It wasn't a great magazine, but I was writing for Punk Planet, and they'd have national distribution. So I played shows in New York, and I was highlighting. I remember that they had a section where you could highlight an archival release, and the first one I did was Kleenex Lilliput. And I remember being in a record store and seeing me hyping Kleenex Lilliput, and I mean, it's just, I mean, I don't mean to wax poetic, but I was making more money as a 22-year-old kid that was just trying to figure out what I was doing than I do now covering that stuff. It's totally, that was, I don't know. It seems like a bygone era, unfortunately.
Yeah, it really does. And I mean, the Goner board was full on during the 90s. We really stumbled into a weird kind of corner, something that Facebook and everything uh, really capitalized, obviously, on a little bit later. There was a site, you could measure sites traffic with this um, website called Alexa, and there's a graph that showed the Goner board and Facebook as two intersecting. Facebook's
Right.
coming up, and the Goner board readership or whatever daily views is going down. But at the time in the mid 90s, there was nowhere there were news groups and things that were really clunky to use, and people would use those. And it's fun to shoot the shit with people that are into the stuff that you're into. And Terminal Boredom was great. And as soon as it started having tumbleweeds and stuff, everybody's like, I'm the only one here. This isn't really fun. You had people getting in full on beefs and
that's inevitable. Yeah.
yeah, and but it's great. It's like I never wanted to be a policeman. I just wanted, if you want to say something stupid, hopefully everybody will say that's stupid. And there's bullies and everything that pop up in any of these situations, and sometimes you gotta kind of steer it back to a better place. But in general, it was self-regulating. Everybody was there to have fun and talk about stuff, and hopefully not get their feelings hurt. You realize it's just kind of just a joke.
Yeah, I tried to keep that site going as long as I could. For the last 3 years or so, I did about 90% of the interviews because I knew how important that site was. Because, like I mentioned earlier, I could put something up there. I could sell 20 to 30 copies. 3 or 4 brick and mortar record stores would email me saying, hey, can I get 5 copies of this or 10 copies of this? And that meant a direct sale. That wasn't a consignment sale with a distributor. They pay you up front. You build a rapport with them. And I mean, let's say you sell 25 copies direct to people. I mean, that would pay for your sleeves on your upcoming 7-inch just off those sales. I mean, I'm not thinking about profitability. I'm thinking about curtailing losses. And that's what Terminal was great for that. The last bastion, I would say, for truly independent music is college and independent radio, WFMU, KDBS. They don't need a one sheet to play. I mean, you write something for them, but they don't need a one sheet to regurgitate and tell them what they should be doing or what their selection of materials should be.
Right. I was somewhere on Facebook, and people I didn't even know that were talking just as AI started coming in, and people were like, I don't have to write press releases anymore. It's like,
yeah, wow.
You don't need to anyway. If the people on the other end could just hit their AI button and talk about your band just as well as you can, if you're not going to write anything,
That's the thing, is that you pay, that's the other thing about the whole thing, is that the whole industry is more or less collapsed in a major way. And there was a time where downloads in the maybe 8-10 years ago were hoping to sop up the losses of vinyl because CD sales just died. And then the people that somehow were able to stick around were the PR people. And so they were sort of the gatekeepers. I mean, that's an ugly truth of it all. It reminds me of a way of like a low rent payola thing with Frederick Dannon wrote about in Hitman, where if you don't pay these people $1,000 to $2,000 a month, and say you pay $6,000 for a 3-month campaign, your shit's just completely on the margins. And that's fine. That's like you'd mentioned earlier, and it was very nice of you, but I feel the same way. I don't care. I'll keep putting this stuff out, and the band should be paid long before these people should be paid. And people who really earn their money, to be honest with you, are the people at the pressing plants, because that's hard labor. But this is people I've talked with people, I won't name names, that do this stuff, and they always tell me it's the hardest check every month to write because you don't know what you're getting.
Yeah, it's
and then that's on top of huge losses already. You know, vinyl is super expensive. It used to take 12 months to make. I'm not bitching about it. I'm just saying that's the reality of pressing records, at least a couple of years ago.
Yeah. So we do the same thing, you know, we've got, you know, we're trying to decide, can we do PR ourselves? Are we going to, you know, add anything that our PR person can't do for this record? I mean, obviously they have connections and things that we don't. And a lot of times people will work with us because they like the music and they like the label. And it's kind of a, hey, don't tell other people we're doing this kind of thing for this rate. Because they're trying to, you know, make money on their thing. But it's the same thing, you know, advertising and PR is just like, where is this money going? And can we do it ourselves just as effectively?
Maybe at some point, and, you know, this is because I went to graduate school for all this stuff for mass comm, and it was actually the department changed from journalism to mass comm because public relations was the only people getting involved at the end of it. So maybe this is a sore subject for me, but, you know, sometimes you could legitimize this when there was a robust industry. Like you mentioned, the Gibson brothers could sell $3,000 to $5,000, and you could have this whole feud taking place with the A-Bones on, you know, whatever. And it was a whole thing in and of itself. But I mean, the numbers are shocking. I mean, what's revenues down? At one point, I think it was close to 50% of the money was just sucked out of the whole industry. And that was at all levels. I think it's recovered somewhat. But I mean, a lot of the stuff that gets talked about streaming and all this stuff being some return, it's like, if you're pressing 300 run 7-inch, it's just a moot point.
Yeah.
And I have to say, though, and I'm not, again, to be honest with you, because you've been doing this a lot longer than me, it really kneecaps new music. I always think of that Retard single you did with Jay in 98 or so, 97, 98. And what's the incentive to do that when stores don't want to buy 7-inches anymore? When your distributors say, don't even press them anymore. And that's a wonderful EP that you released. And you gave, I mean, I know it probably comes with mixed feelings, but you gave a kid from Memphis basically a career. You started the whole thing. I mean, you should be proud of that.
He was going to happen one way or another. If not right then, if people aren't going to put him banging on buckets in his bathroom, eventually something was going to happen. But yeah, it was a great ride to see that. Zach's down in Austin at the Austin Record Convention for this weekend. And the only time I've gone to the Austin Record Convention, I went with Tim Warren, and we had a table with Mike Mariconda sitting there. And all I had was, I think I had this Moondog record that I'd got at a record store in sometime in the 80s for like 39 cents. And these Retards records that no one had ever heard of. And they looked cool, so people would walk up and go, "What's that?" And they'd put them on their portable record players, and it was so trebly and so just such a mess. It just sounded like people were like, "I'll take 5. Can I have 5 of these?" Yeah, you can have 5 of them. Take 5. It's probably going to be a big collectible, you know. And I sold all those, and eventually sold that Moondog record that I wish I still had. But
no kidding. And you sold your Sue Tissue Salon de Musique.
Record.
I've never seen one of those in the wild. I've never seen one.
That was an estate sale that we walked into, and this guy, it looked like a record store in this place, and all the regulars, the estate sale regulars, were sitting there with Gun Club and Germs records on their lap, and they were looking them up on their phone trying to figure out what they were. And so you know, we got there an hour or so later, and, you know, so that the obvious stuff was gone, and picked up Desperate Bicycles record, the Sue Tissue record, just banana stuff. And
really
I still dream about that sale, what I left there, what was there. And on the way out, I asked the guy, didn't this guy have 45s? He said, oh yeah, he has 45s. And I said, well, where are they? He said, we'll have another sale, and I'm still waiting for that sale.
That's amazing.
But yeah, it's funny talking to you and just kind of seeing what you've been up to with the writing and the label, just to what I kind of feel, I don't know, just championing the underdog, the people that are out there doing this stuff, just doing it to nobody, and not that a pressing, like you say, of 300 is mass, hitting the masses, but it's getting it out there to exist on some form. And I don't know, it's always, I'm always inspired by the stuff that you're doing as well. I don't know. Tell me about like hooking up or getting together with like the Clit Sisters records and all that kind of stuff. How'd you get into that stuff?
Well, you'd mentioned the three cities, and you were right. It was because I'm from Los Angeles. I lived in New Zealand, and the Memphis thing was just because I got to really like people from Memphis, Tennessee. It was just, they're very nice. I'm just being honest with you. It's that straightforward. And so I got to know Ross Johnson really well, the Baron, and he was always pushing stuff on me, and not in a way that was bad. It was just, here's this. And it's the same thing in New Zealand, because in New Zealand during the 80s and 90s, there were like Richie Venus had his own record label. There were a couple really underground labels, but the infrastructure was really lacking. So there's still, Lax was one of the first guys, like I mentioned, to do it, where you can find unbelievable gems on C90 cassette tapes just floating around, and you could reissue them if you want. But part of that was also happening in Memphis with, all that stuff with Barbarian Records. Ross told me he used to call Barbarian Records Barbarian Tapes because all they did was tape stuff and they never released it. And so the Clit Sisters fell into that trap where they were recording all the time, but none of it was coming out. So Ross had these tracks, and he said, "Oh, you should listen to this stuff," and it was wonderful. And it just fell into that purgatory of, if it was in Los Angeles or New York City or something, people would have jumped all over it. I think Memphis music's always been underappreciated. I'm not telling you that. I tell that to anyone from any city. So I just said, yeah, let's look into it. And there was a bunch, obviously it's just me and more. I don't have a legal team. So there was some legal issues connected to it where I actually had to write the Chilton estate and all of this stuff to do it. But I wanted to do it in a way that wouldn't get a cease and desist clearly or ruffle feathers, just on a personal level. And once I was able to line those ducks up in a row, and it took several months, and yeah, I lost sleep over it. I'm not going to lie. It was to break even, on a release. So I got it out of an obligation to do it. And I met Marsha Clifton in particular, is just really wonderful person. So I got to, every time we go to Goner Fest, we stay at Marsha's house. And there was a bunch of tapes there, and I did the live 7-inch. A guy in France did a LP just because I didn't feel comfortable with some of the material on it, in the sense of I didn't know if someone had rights to it. But that's my thing, is I give handshake deals to artists. If you let me release it, if you want, 6 months later, do whatever you want with it. It's yours. And he asked if he could reuse my liner notes. I said, sure, I don't care. And so that was it. It was just promoting them. And there's a documentary in the works apparently about the Clits. So that's pretty interesting. They could have been much bigger. Miles Copeland was courting them,
Right.
to New York and all this stuff. They basically were the archetype for what the Go-Go's were. And that I went to the same high school as Belinda and Lorna Doom and Donna Rhea out in the suburbs of Los Angeles. So that's a connection there.
Right.
So
right.
Yeah, it was really Ross Johnson. Ross is Ross is amazing. I mean, he can he's just like an encyclopedia. People downplay his erudition, but this guy's well read. He worked at a library for decades. He usually coming in hungover by his own admission, but
yeah, it's great to have Ross around, and he's amazing.
Originally from Arkansas.
Yep. And you got to work with Jeff Evans. You did the CC Riders record.
You helped me on that. Do you remember that?
I don't remember. What did I do?
I was Friedel, when you're putting out records and you're trying not to, I just try to do things legitimately in the sense of whether that's not getting a cease and desist like I mentioned, or just pissing people off, because there's no money in this, and you could piss people off really easily. And so I just say I was conscious of that because I had done a couple 7-inches when I was like 23, and immediately just lost all my money and quit. But with CC Riders, Jay had passed away, so I didn't know what was going on with his estate. I didn't know what to do. I asked Alicia and Jeff about it, and they were game, but Jay had gotten to be very well known at that point in time. So I asked, I was like, who do I write, Friedel? And you're like, oh, this is the guy in charge of the estate. And I was like, how many should I press? And you're like, X amount. And I remember I was actually before a drafting class. I was taking professional drafting classes because my dad and I were doing the cabinet shop together. And I was before class talking with you on the phone in Santa Barbara City College, of all places. And
nice.
you were giving me the whole rigmarole. It was like an hour. And
that was a long time ago.
It was a long time ago. I think it was 2013 or so. But that's the best-selling record I ever did.
It's a good record. It's a good record that, it kind of fits in my mind. It was a cassette first, right? Or a CDR. It was a CDR.
It was a CDR on Contaminated, Alicia's label.
It kind of fits in with the Anyway kind of. To me, it feels like an Anyway cassette release. Old age, no age kind of Mike Rep type of thing. It's got just kind of wild and woolly, and Jeff's in the middle of it with phone calls and with Jay and James Arthur and Alicia. I mean, what a band. It's great.
It caught a moment in time. But, that's another thing, too, is I'm friends with Adam Smith that did Columbus Discount Records. That was, he's from Columbus, Ohio. And just hearing all those stories about Tommy J and all those people. I mean, if anything, I feel a kinship with those people because the music they put out was just so left of the dial. And it was really outstanding. But they were kind of creating music in sort of a vacuum out there in Ohio. And that's same with New Zealand. A lot of that New Zealand stuff was actually out of Auckland. And so, he had great stories about all of that. And he helped me out quite a bit. Actually, he used to cut all my lacquers when his lathe was set up. He's a great guy. And it's a shame too, because Columbus Discount Records should be a label that should still be putting out records themselves. But, Adam kind of quit when sales just started nosediving. He was just to leave. He was doing
was he doing a series of Cheater Slicks live records, or was that?
He did. He did a couple I think he did a couple Cheater Slicks live records. He did the Bassel stuff. He was doing. Well, he reissued the Bill Raff Gibson Brothers record,
right?
And he was doing. I mean, at that time, even Jay Was Shattered was doing those singles club. Columbus Discount was doing those singles clubs as well. I mean, think about during the whole brouhaha around Record Store Day and all those plants being clogged up. At one point, you could just put out reliably singles on time. And
right.
Yeah. Now it's just like, no, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, we struggle to sell stuff, and we struggle to sell LPs and singles. And, I'm kind of, on the fence, like, this stuff has been sitting, but if I don't stock it, who's going to stock this record? It's, and when I see there's a guy I just found out, in Florida that came to Goner Fest, opened up a record store as a side hustle. You know, he has kept his day job. I highly recommend that to everyone out there. I still have a side job. You know,
I always tell Ross the smartest thing he ever did was stay at the library.
That's right. And so this guy was going through like just in this week, and I'm like, okay, yeah, you know, those are kind of mainstream records. And then he's got, I don't know, Digital Leather or somebody in there. It's something Brimstone Howl records that there's no reason why really you should be stocking that unless you're just doing it because you like those records and you want to have them in your store and you want to turn people onto that stuff, which is always great. You know, it's great until you look at that record for 2 years and you go, what was I thinking? But
it's the same.
You know, you hope people can still do that.
Well, I mean, it's at that same thing where I put out records and, you know, every year I'm running it in the red. I curtail the losses as much as I can, but when you're actually trying to run a profitable business, it's a different ballgame. When you're actually trying to keep a label going and you know your employees paid, you have to play the necessary evil of public relations, and there are certain expectations built into it. But when you're just a fucking loser like me that's been doing this way too long, you just go, okay, well, I'm gonna shoot from the hip. I don't give a shit, and I'm gonna put it out. But at the same time, that works for me. But I benefit from people like you and Larry Hardy. Larry will take a bunch of copies in advance of everything I release, and he's somehow been able to thread that needle where he has an exceptional record label that puts out good stuff, and yet he's still running at a profit. And that's hard to do. And I think you had to have been established a long time ago, or come from a lot of, you know, have a lot of money to be able to sustain those heavy losses today. But he's rare.
Or just have a hit. You know, I think like Feel It Records put out. What did they put out? They ended up on Sub Pop. And they played Goner Fest twice. My brain is gone. I'll edit the name of the band in here. But anyway, they sold, you know, I think they sold like 5,000 copies of the record. You know, it's a good record that actually clicked with people. And you know, if you do this, if you know, I look at if you hit the right pocket at the right time, 5,000 copies is not a lot. I mean, it's out of all the people that listen to this kind of music and everything, it's really not. But you just cannot get people to buy them. You can't get them to them.
No.
So anyway, you know, it can happen. And Sam from Feel It is awesome. I mean, the stuff that he's been putting out has been all over the place, from you know, stuff that makes sense, that's very kind of, oh, you could sell this, to stuff that's like local kind of hardcore stuff that maybe that's a different market than I know. But I'm always inspired by the stuff that he's putting out as well.
That Optic Sync record he did was great recently. Really like
so good. They just went to a new level. They are killing it right now.
You know what the flip side of that though is, if you have that runaway hit, all the money disappears and you get a bad reputation.
always.
You don't know what you're doing. All of a sudden you have a bunch of records going out and you got to pay royalties, and you're sopping up the losses of that 500 run LP that should have been a 50 run cassette.
Oh yeah. Now, Sweeping Promises. I don't know why my brain could not come up with that, but Sweeping Promises, just the sweetest people, and it's such I mean, really, really strong band coming out of, you know, kind of nowhere, and he had a hit, you know, and as far as I could tell, he used that to, you know, fund these other things that are, you know, the same kind of editions of 500, 600, and then see if it works, you know, go from there.
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to wax poetic. I mean, you had labels that were putting out stuff back in the late 70s and 80s that clearly weren't going anywhere. I mean, Happy Squid Records was the Urinals imprint, and they were doing NEEF records. It was like LA Free Music Society stuff. There's no way they were moving many copies of those, to the point where they pressed so little that some of this stuff was selling for $300-400, 20 years later.
Right.
Well, I mean, yeah, it depends. I would just say that the chances are diminished quite a bit. And like you said, that the amount of, you're not talking more like about pallets or something of records moving now. It's a much more modest amount.
Yeah. So you're gonna keep on slogging. You got stuff in the works. What's you been working on?
I did the General Labor stuff.
More Memphis.
More Memphis stuff. I like Memphis people. We got the Maryland's record coming out probably in a month or two. It's all-girl Memphis group that existed between the Clits and the Hellcats. Marilyn Albert's in there. They played the Antenna Club all the time. In fact, I think there's a plaque outside the Antenna Club, and it says the Maryland's on it as being
it's a sore subject, but they did put a plaque up. It said the Maryland's on it. It said a bunch of bands. It also obviously didn't say some band that got someone's feelings hurt, and the plaque was stolen like the week after it was put up. So,
I had no idea. So we're doing that, and then what else did we do? We put out a flood of stuff. We did. I'm completely spacing on what we've done recently.
Well, you did the Wednesday week and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Maybe that was a little bit further back, but
yeah, we did that, and then the Happy Squid sampler came out a little while ago. That was awesome. I really wanted that to come out, and
you had a really good Red Mass single in there that just kind of blew me away. I think Red Mass and Roy's projects in general kind of get taken for granted until you actually listen to them, and then they kind of really kill you. I mean, we're doing a band he's in right now called Pi Pi is going to be our next full length, and it's amazing. Yeah, I'm always impressed with his stuff too.
Yeah. I mean, well, that guy he's been doing it with CPC Gangbangs and all that stuff for so long. I mean, that's the other thing too, is that, in the 2000s, there was so many labels. A lot of them were coming out of Europe, Yaki Sakana, SSLD. Tully was doing Perpetrator out in New Zealand. A lot of that was actually based on MySpace. People forget that. Is that there was these streaming plays. And when I moved to New Zealand, Tully was one of the guys I met. And I actually started the label, not to go back to the beginning, but because I had a bunch of inventory. A friend of mine tried to start up a record store in New Zealand and completely failed. And unfortunately, and there was some money owed, so he just gave me a bunch of records. So I traded out all these Perpetrator stuff for to get it back in the States. And I told Robert I would do that Electric Blood record. So that's how that actually started, was just kind of happenstance. But we did the True Green tape, and we're going to do another 7-inch with Dan. And then I don't want to put people that did music a long time ago and not pay attention to what they're doing now. So we did the Strike Slip, which was John Talley Jones and Juan Gomez from Human Hands, and then we did that Marsha Clifton Lathe cut. She's super stoked. It was great. It was really good.
It was great. I loved it. Yeah.
But there's one left. If anyone wants it, we have literally one left. And so,
awesome. We sold through what we have, as far as I know. I haven't seen them unless someone stashed it somewhere to go buy later when they had an extra, when they got paid or something.
I mean, you're one of the last, one of the last guys still doing it with this type of stuff. There are other stores, but I'm always deeply concerned about. It seems like people are a little blasé about how bad the real conditions. Maybe I'm an alarmist, but how bad the conditions are for this type of music now. It really is. The not only are the records not selling, but the infrastructure, the the journalism for it is just absolutely scorched earth. There are holdouts, don't get me wrong, but it's not like it used to be. It's really I'm concerned about it because I used to write for 3 or 4 different fanzines all the time, and now I basically just will check one out here and there, but there's just, I mean, Rocktober's gone, MRR's no longer printing. I don't know what's up with Celluloid Lunch. There's a bunch of stuff that was kind of popping up for a little bit, but it's troubling, Friedel. At least I feel that way.
Yeah, no, for real. Yeah, I mean, Record Time popped up. They're kind of they to me that feels kind of like a Rocktober type of thing. With they're trying to stay off the internet, kind of record collector without being record collector.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, just a different take on it, I guess.
Right.
But to me, and this is me getting older and not going to shows as much, but everything gets harder when you can't tour, you can't meet other people that are doing the same kind of thing. Not that you can't stay in your town and even stay in your room or whatever, have your friends over and make amazing music, but it's always more exciting that when you get to be in a room with other bands doing stuff. And it just that was always kind of the point, I think. Maybe when I started, it was kind of the point. If you got to drink beer and do it, then that was the best thing in the world, you know. And eventually it was just drinking beer. But
yeah, there was that book that I bought off you about the women in factory records.
Oh yeah, I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, there's an analogy there where someone says music scenes are like weather patterns, and some of them, you know, they storm and you have just a bunch of things happening at one time, and then that weather pattern moves. I thought that was a good analogy because that was definitely the case. I mean, when I started the label with More, of course I'm not delusional, but the thing I told her was we have to do 13 releases. And the reason I said we had to do 13 releases was because Fast Product did 13 releases. And Fast Product, I thought that if you did 2 or 3 releases, you were just throwing your money in the fireplace. You might as well throw a duffel bag of money into the fireplace and do 13 releases, because my thinking was Fast had established a legacy off of 13 releases. Of course, nobody's going to have the kind of run they did with Human League, Scars, Gang of Four,
Mekon's in there.
Yeah, exactly. But my point is that with 13 releases, they established the fact that this is easy for us. we can if I wanted to. It was like Bob Lash and his partner, I think her name was Hillary, had done that label. And then there was a documentary about Scottish music, and it just showed everyone partying at their flat, like you had mentioned.
Right.
And it was just this camaraderie that people had there. You found that. I mean, the label that I always thought was great that no one gives, it seems like they're forgotten somewhat, was What Records with Chris Ashford.
Yeah.
When he did the Germs Forming single, I mean, he wasn't much older than Darby and Pat, maybe the same age. And it just showed you how that whole scene happened. Most of those people went to Uni High School, which was like 3/4 of a mile from where I grew up. And it was just a bunch of people at the same school that formed these bands and wrote for Slash Magazine and did that. And Memphis, by the way, you know, Memphis and Montreal in the 2000s, there was a lot going on. And obviously I'm talking with someone that was a key player in that scene. So that seems to be what happens. You know, it's just sometimes you have like a good run in a city, the infrastructure's there, and it works.
Was that I think I saw that Scottish music documentary. I think, is that the one where the go-betweens decide? Maybe this was just more of a postcard.
It was
documentary, but the go-betweens are like, no one understands us in Australia. We'll go to Scotland. That's where they get us, and they show up, and everybody there is like, what are you doing here? There's nothing here.
Exactly right. Yeah, that was the mistake a lot of Kiwi bands made too. They would go to Australia and then they would go to England, like the Bats and everything would go there. The Chills were the most notable example. And then they went to Los Angeles, my town, and it was just hell on earth. It was like, no, you shouldn't go to these places if you can sell a bunch of. I mean, looking at it now in our scorched earth policy record format is like, oh, if you could make the New Zealand charts, that's exceptional. It's very good. Now, don't go to Los Angeles and record a record for Slash. Just don't do it.
Right. Yeah, birthday party too. We're going to go be a big band in London, and they were better off probably just touring from Australia if that was, the thing, or relocating to Berlin and hang out with other weirdos.
West Berlin was really good. The state subsidized a lot. No one wanted to live there because you were over when it was still the Cold War period, but I mean, unfortunately, the drawback to it. I interviewed Kid, and there was a lot of hard drugs floating around at that time too.
Yeah, it was wild. It was something else. Forgot what I was going to say. I don't know what we've kind of talked about the end of all good music and how records can't be made anymore and how journalism has died. What else could we talk about? I don't know. It's
I think the thing is that there's always a bunch of people like you and me in every generation that will keep doing it against really bad odds. But I don't think that's a sustainable model. You can't just have people getting burned out after 5 or 10 years. And then, there's quite often I'll see on Twitter or something, someone who released records, say like on a label like Feeding Tube, and they have a freak out where they just go, I can't believe this is the end, and It's sad. It's sad. That's real. Like, people cannot deny that. It's not just you and me waxing poetic about the good old days, because the good old days were garbage too, but it's getting really bad, in terms of sustainability of music. So, but
we, there's these labels that'll pop up, and I can't think of this label either, but this guy was putting out just records at a blistering pace. Good stuff.
It was like a sympathy Who was that? It was like a sympathy style release of like 25 singles a year.
Yeah. And this kid, and I was like, well, it's awesome because this stuff comes out and a lot of it is good, at least for his stuff. But I was like, it's not sustainable. You can't, unless you've got some corporate job gives you way too much money to blow through. But just your enthusiasm and everything, it will burn you out when you're trying to keep track of all this stuff, or, just trying to keep track of people and relationships and everything to get these things done. Maybe some people could do it. Maybe some people are like, super high achieving, bedroom record producer type of people, but it's in general, it's like, they're selling them for $5. It costs them $7. We can't compete with them. We'll just wait them out, and 5 years later they'll be gone. And unfortunately, that is the case. Rather than like, and I have no problem with people that do this for a while and then move on to another part of their life or whatever. I totally understand that, and I'm jealous of them for having something else to do, because obviously I haven't figured that out. But
I haven't either, Friedel. I haven't either. I worked as a mechanic, and I worked at cabinet shops my whole life. But the guy that's closest to doing that is Gabriel in Italy. I don't know how that guy has maintained that enthusiasm at Goodbye Boozy.
He's the best.
Oh, he's unbelievable. The guy's a machine. Yeah,
and he has the records before, of the bands that you want to hear before the band anyone knows about those bands, even now, which is just incredible to me.
Well, the first Lost Room single came out on SSLD, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. Yeah. He's So he, and the Goner Fest, kind of the same angle at the time was Solid Sex Lovey Doll, kind of the Collector Scum version of all that. But what really, to this day, blew me and Zach's minds when we had our first Goner Fest, and we put everything in this club that holds maybe 50 people, and we see Federico Zanuto walking down the street at a part of town where you probably even think twice about walking down the street. We're like, we have brought this guy from Italy to come to this show that we thought we'd get maybe 20 people at, you know.
Yeah.
And we realized, okay, this is going to be interesting. And you know, that through all that, you know, through the Goner board, through terminal boredom, through putting out records, being in bands, going to shows, there's some sort of sense of community that, you know, when everything goes right, you're like, this is worth it. You know, this is what it's all about, meeting people that are doing interesting things. And, you know, just, I mean, to me, that's what makes it worthwhile.
You've done really well with that. And you've gone to a point where it's not a joke or terrible like South by Southwest. You've kind of threaded the needle. And I think that the rail yard where you hosted, I really like the centralized location as well. I don't know how you feel about that, but I thought that when you solidified it and had it at one spot, it was really nice because you just saw, I mean, I go there and I think I've been there 3 years in a row and I see the same people. I mean, I don't know who they are, but I see the same people I recognize from the year before.
Yeah, it's incredible. Our idea originally was, you know, you're going to go to these different places all over Memphis, and, you know, it was a lot smaller. The scale was smaller. And when we started having it at Rail Garden, it allowed us, to kind of do bigger things without feeling like it was too big. It's pretty much a perfect spot right next to the rail, you know, train tracks and everything. So, and yeah, we try to tell the tourism people, we're like, we get these people that have come to Memphis 10 times. I mean, AutoZone, you know, if you work for AutoZone, you come to your convention a couple times maybe, but, you know, no tourists come to Memphis 10 times in a row like this kind of, I mean, it's just, it's incredible that people, this is their thing. You know, it's not even necessarily the music. It ends up being the people. You know, they come to see the people that they know are going to be there.
You can only see Sun Records so many times. Weren't you a tour guide at there one time?
You know, my girlfriend was the manager, and so I would, when I was not touring, I got to be upstairs in the record room and managed to never give a tour. So it would have been fun, but I really did not want to do that. I would rather be with the records. I took over the record room from Jim Cole, and yeah, it was a great job. All we did was sit around and eat cheeseburgers. Yeah, wait till Rufus Thomas or Sam Phillips came in and just listened to stories. It's so good.
Rufus was the consummate professional. Someone told me he was playing like Antones or something, and for whatever reason it was held up late and the show didn't start till something like 3 a.m. And Rufus just put on a performance that it was like he was playing to 1,000 people. Just a total.
Oh yeah.
But I think I don't know if Memphis is like that, and other cities are like that in regards if Memphis is an outlier. But you know, the city itself never seems to appreciate the talent within it. I mean, famously, they tore down the Stax building only to rebuild it. So yeah, I don't know, but I don't know if that's just a hallmark of every city. But it seems like Memphis just isn't able to capitalize on the raw talent that's there, because there's a lot of, I mean, throughout history, there have been just some of the greatest musicians have come out of Memphis.
Yeah, well, they're still, you know, gunning each other down. You know, whenever you get to be Young Dolph and you get gunned down the road from us, so it's a tough, it's a good place to get out of, I think, but it is hard to make it here.
No, it's tough. I mean, that seems to be the situation with a lot of cities. They're either getting hugely gentrified and unbelievably expensive, or they're going, you know, like an Akron, Ohio route where everything's kind of falling apart.
Yeah, I think even the crap cities are getting more expensive.
Thanks for listening to the Ghana Records podcast. We're looking to get these out more regularly. Stay tuned.
It used to
We
be
appreciate
when
you
I'd go on
checking this
tour, I
out
get
and
to
other
go
Ghana
to nice
projects.
places and
Might not
get to
necessarily
hang out
be
in
directly
nice places
money-making
with nice
things for the label, shop, store.
That was a
but
nice part.
we hope you find them interesting,
Yeah.
educational, somewhat
Like
Go to
entertaining.
Italy and
You can support us by
Japan
shopping
and
in Ghana,
Australia.
buying Ghana
Can't beat it.
releases and merchandise,
No, that's
and through our
nice.
Patreon.
That's nice.
Check that
We're
out
going to
at
Austria. We're going to Austria in June
patreon.com/Ghana
again, so
Records.
that'll be
Thanks again for listening.
nice.
See you soon.
Yeah, civilization. Well, Ryan, I think we've covered pretty much everything we need to cover for this time. Maybe we'll catch up down the road a little bit once you put out a few more releases and see what you're up to. But I really appreciate you talking to me today.
Well, I appreciate you doing this because, I mean, it's just one of those things where, I mean, you're still trying to help underground music, and there aren't too many people doing it these days. So,
Oh man, people need to know about this stuff. People love it, so we're gonna persevere.
thank you for
Times will change.
It's like we're gonna find Colonel Kurtz in the jungle of Apocalypse Now.
Yeah,
He's gonna tell us about the horror.
we know about that, man. We know about that.
Yeah, we do.
Thanks for listening to the Ghana Records podcast. We're looking to get these out more regularly. Stay tuned. We appreciate you checking this out and other Ghana projects. Might not necessarily be directly money-making things for the label, shop, store, but we hope you find them interesting, educational, somewhat entertaining. You can support us by shopping in Ghana, by buying Ghana releases and merchandise, and through our Patreon. Check that out at patreon.com/Ghana Records. Thanks again for listening. See you soon.